How does your, if you don't mind me asking, how does your husband deal with the fame and notoriety that you have?
He's very good about it. I mean, he said once something like, every few months, Meg will say something that upends our life, and then we have to deal with that. But for the most part, it has more positives than negatives. People are so nice. Look, I have like just a small level of fame, if that's the word we want to use. It's like people recognize me, but they're very respectful. No one's ever nasty. I mean, they used to be more when I was on Fox, but the percentage of nastiness is like less than 1. The percentage of kindness is all 99. And the percentage of intrusions into my personal time that are unwanted is almost none. Like people are pretty good about reading whether you are approachable in that moment or not. Like if I'm with my kids, they leave me alone. I've noticed if I'm with Doug, they usually leave me alone too. If I'm on my own, they feel more comfortable coming over. But some of that's nice. It's like a little ego boost. They come over, they say all lovely things. Then they say, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I said, what are you apologizing for? Said all these beautiful things to me, right? Made me feel good. But I can go places. I don't have to worry. It's just, I feel like I'm right at a good level where I can pay my bills and I can sort of have a microphone and people want to listen to it, but people are so respectful, and it's not, I can't imagine how like truly, well-known people live.
Yeah. Yeah. Back to Fox. You get your first, I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know what to call it. Main show, primetime show.
Well, so I had a show in the morning and then the afternoon and then primetime. Yeah.
How was that?
The primetime?
Yeah.
It was great. It was exciting. The night before we went on the air live, we played Don't Change a Thing by INXS. We all danced. And then we went out there and did it, and it was great. It was so fun. It was just such a big moment for us all.
Does your team follow you everywhere you go?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Same executive producer and core producers, and I love my old EP. I love my current EP too. But this guy, Tom Lowell, was just like, we were in it together from 2007 to when I left in 17. I mean, just 10 years of insane events. And he was like a blood brother to me. So I love that guy and always will. And primetime was exciting and just definitely a different level of attention and importance and high wire act. You sit down on the set and you feel yourself.
Do you get an adrenaline dump?
Definitely.
Every time?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. But, I was torn during those years too, because we launched the Kelly File 2 months after Thatcher, my youngest, was born. And he was so little, and I would bring him in. It was a new schedule, where I worked basically 3 to 11 p.m. You can't just go in at 8 if you're doing the 9 p.m. news. You have to prepare.
Yeah.
A lot, especially if you're me. And first I thought this would be so great because my kids are little. They're not yet in school. I can be with them. It's not really how it works. Before you know it, they are in school during those hours, and you leave just as they get home. But my babe was not in school. He was an infant, and I'd bring him into Fox. He'd be with me. I'd be distracted. He'd fall asleep. I'd put him on the little sofa right across from me, and he'd sleep in his little, And I just felt so bad about it. It just felt like the wrong thing to be doing. It was the first time my professional goals really clashed with my personal goals, because doing the earlier shows, like in the afternoon when my first two were little, I was balancing it much better. I was gone like in the middle of the day. I was there with them for most of the morning, and I was with them for all of the evening. I put them to bed every night. I was a very present mother. And then with Thatcher, for that beginning first year of the Kelly File, it's just, he was with me a lot at Fox, but it wasn't quality time. It's the first time my heart really started to like cry, like this isn't good enough. And I was 13 to 14, 14 to 15, 15 to 16. Yeah, so I was going on 4 years, and I was like, Thatcher was 3 when I left Fox, so I just got to the point where I was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this one more minute. Not one more minute. I loved my audience. I loved my show, and I loved my job, most of it. But I love them so much more. There's not even any contest.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like I had to give up journalism. I could still do something in the field going over to NBC. It wasn't exactly what I wanted, but it was something. So it seemed like a good compromise.
Can we talk about 2016?
Yeah. We can talk about all of it.
With you and Trump?
Yeah. Good times.
It doesn't sound like it. I mean, I remember when that happened, and how do you deal with that?
I see it so differently now. I see it as one of my thank you moments, for sure. I am a lot stronger and tougher than I used to be, in a good way, not like bad tough. And I have a very good perspective on what happened there and my role in it and why Trump was doing that. But when I was going through it, I lacked that perspective. And so it was more traumatic. Like anything, especially a crisis you go through, the wisdom only comes later.
Mm-hmm.
When you're in the midst of it, you're just dealing with the fire hose of shit. So it was highly unpleasant. And the biggest challenge for me was trying to report on him without being a rabid opposition force. I refused to let his negative comments about me ongoing turn me into the very thing he was saying I was. Unfair. I can't be fair to Trump. I'm all the other words, whatever. I was determined to go out there and be fair to him at night, notwithstanding what he was doing to me in my personal life. And I think I did a decent job of it. It wasn't perfect, but I think I did a decent job of it.
What I know what it was, but I just want to ask you, what was the question that you asked that triggered that response?
Well, it was something like, you've called women you don't like fat pigs, dogs, slobs, disgusting animals. Your Twitter account is littered with negative comments about women. And it began with, one of the things people love about you is you don't use a politician's filter, but that's not without its downsides, especially when it comes to women. And I went over the things he said about women. And then I said, there was once a celebrity, apprentice contestant who you said you'd like to see her on her knees. Does that sound to you like the temperament of a man we should elect as president? And how will you answer the charge coming from Democrats that you are part of the war on women? I love my question. I know people disagree, and that's fine. They're entitled to their opinions too. But I loved it. I thought it was perfect. And I worked on it tirelessly. And people think that Rupert Murdoch blessed it, allowed it, greenlit it. Absolutely not. I'd love for the people who are mad at me over that question to blame it on somebody else, but no, all the blame goes on me. And that's fine. As I say, I stand behind the question 100%. We're not supposed to be chumming with these guys.
Mm-hmm.
It's supposed to be adversarial. It's a presidential debate. Let's go. Let's get it on.
That's what I thought.
And it made electric television. It was spectacular to watch. The highest rated debate in U.S. history.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Well, I don't know if the record still stands because Trump went on to be, but nothing came close prior to that.
Well, we don't have very many presidential debates anymore, so.
No.
I'm sure it's still.
I think we're going to get some still.
When he had implied blood coming out of her eyes, blood coming out of her wherever, I mean, that was pretty much what kicked the whole thing off, correct?
That, he'd been tweeting that I was a bimbo, and he'd been tweeting out pictures I did for GQ magazine, that kind of thing.
How did that, I mean, what aspect of your life do you think that affected the most?
Probably the most was
family?
internal at Fox. it created just such a shitstorm internal at Fox because Roger was very worried he was going to lose the core base of his audience that had fallen in love with Trump, but he was still trying to hold on to the establishment wing of the Republican Party. And we were getting so much hate mail. I was getting so much hate mail. It seemed like overnight I went from someone the audience liked to someone they loathed. But the ratings didn't suffer, which was interesting. My ratings never went down. They only went up.
Really?
I know. So it's odd, but people were very angry with me over that question. They really thought I tried to kneecap Trump. And I understand why they thought that. I just don't see it that way at all. Like if you would ever go back and look at that whole debate, and look at that first opening round of questions, we were so mean to all of them. All of them. I basically told Ben Carson he seemed like an idiot and listed all the ways in which he had evidenced that and made him explain why it wasn't true. I mean, mean questions, but mean in like a good way. Journalists should not be cozy with presidential candidates. They should be tough on them. These should be the toughest A+ level questions you can craft. That's what I think a presidential debate should be. Then let them fight. And we did our job. We did our job that night. And Trump answered that question beautifully. He really did. He was humorous. He was like a bull, like only Rosie O'Donnell, which made everybody laugh. And then he said the classic Trump line of what I say is what I say, right? That's Trump to this day. So it was an opportunity really for him, and he nailed it. And if he hadn't decided to make a thing out of that question, the world would have just moved on. But he did. And I think he did it for a variety of reasons. And then just like the stress in my life internally. And because there were many people who were mad at me over the question too, like diehard loyalists to Trump inside the building. And outside, because the security situation in our lives went nuts. It was very weird how like the threat level started to go up. And like you always get death threats, sadly, as a public figure, but these were scary and they were specific, and we kept having to call in security teams, and we had to investigate this person and that person, the other person, and do we get a restraining order or whatever? And then strange, odd men showing up to my home in the middle of the night and yelling at me in front of my children. And it was just like, whoa, whoa, whoa. This is next level off of the one question, and Trump had so many bigger problems in the news. I was the least of his problems. He had people who hated him and were openly espousing it every day. I'm like, why me? And I think there are all sorts of answers to that, but I was unhappy. I was, as you know from the discussion we've had, I was going into that year kind of unhappy about how things had changed at Fox and my kids and all that. And then I was just getting more unhappy. So it was just, there's a scene, you mentioned that you watched the movie Bombshell. You said that to me before we started. And there is one scene in that movie where Charlize Theron, playing me, is in like an edit bay. And she's having a conversation with my fake husband, Doug. And while that scene never happened in my life, the sentiment she expressed 100% did. Where she said something like, I'm allowed to want this to be over. That was it, exactly. I'm allowed to want this to be over. And I did end it. I managed to end it on a good note with Trump. The media turned on me 180, of course, because they wanted me to be his antagonist. They wanted him to say more things about me because they would make a story out of it every time he did. And they saw it as a surrender by me to him.
When you say that you think he did it for a variety of reasons, what are the reasons?
I think the first night he was genuinely mad at me. And I now know from everyone, I mean, from reporting around Trump, all these in-depth pieces from people close to Trump, not just his detractors. I mean, that, and even deposition testimony that was given in some of the lawsuits against him and the legal cases from him and others, they knew that the women thing was going to be a problem for Trump. Long before America knew it, long before I knew it. I found that issue only because I asked my research assistants to get me, information on everybody. And they came in with, this is this guy's weakness. This is this gal's weakness. So I was ready to punch them all where it hurt. And Trump's was like this, and it was all about women. Now we're more used to some of this stuff, but back in 2015, that debate was August 2015, to have a presidential candidate having said that stuff about women and done some of those things with women was like, what? We had Bill Clinton. I haven't forgotten that, but I'm just saying this was not the norm. So I was like, this is going to be a good one, right? To ask him about this stuff. It wasn't an attempt to take him out. It was like, let's go, right? Like, let's go. I'm going to bring my A game. You bring yours. It's on. I'm doing your favorite thing, good TV. Let's do that thing together. And I think it touched a nerve because it was a soft spot for him. He knew he was exposed. So initially he was mad. Why did he keep it going for 9 months? I think he enjoyed it. And he knew it was a good storyline for him. And he was right. I'm not beholden to Fox. I will take on Fox News. I will take on the female anchor. I won't be controlled by anyone. I won't bow to any of the right's sacred cows. I'm for you, not for the elites, the establishment, the so-called bosses of the Republican Party. F them all. You and I are together. That's what Trump was saying to his fans. And it was brilliant. I was just part of it. You know, he was making me part of that messaging long past the point at which I wanted anything to do with that. You know, I just kind of wanted to do my journalism. And I punched him some nights from the anchor desk, and other nights I defended him. In fact, I didn't really hit Trump much at all. The one thing I remember going after him on was when he criticized the Gold Star family. I didn't like that. But other than that, honestly, I was defending Trump most of the nights. So
you didn't get vindictive. You didn't.
No.
At all.
No. Even though as he continued doing this, my feelings on him personally definitely soured.
Oh, I could imagine. How did your family take it?
Doug's feelings soured more. He was very frustrated. He really wanted it to stop. He wanted to defend me, but he couldn't. You know, I knew that would be inappropriate. It wouldn't help, and it would undermine me. You know, I didn't need to run to my husband to make it stop. I needed to go to the gorilla himself, as I call Trump. He's always the 800-pound gorilla. So it was very hard. I mean,
were your kids old enough to understand what was going on?
No, and nor did I want them to.
Yeah.
Nor did I want to poison them on Trump.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't want to poison them on anybody politically. Back then I was really just thinking, I want them to figure out eventually where they stand on politics and politicians, and Trump could be president. I certainly don't want them loathing the president. So I didn't tell my kids a lot. You know, they'd see some of the security issues. You know, we went to Disneyland with an armed guard, Disney World. That was weird. He was like following us around on all the rides. So it was strange. Things like that they'd notice, but no. So anyway, I had tried to get Trump to stop through Hannity, he was very gracious and tried to help me out. They're friends. Roger tried time and time again. No. Had other people go to backdoor. No. And then Brian Kilmeade actually offered to send Trump an email for me because he knew I wanted a meeting. And Trump said yes. So I went there. I didn't tell Roger. And I settled it with Trump 1-to-1. And he never bothered me again. And Roger was incensed. He was so angry that I went there and didn't tell him. And I think it's because he wanted the credit for putting it to bed. What he said to me was, you don't go to him. He should have come to you, or you meet at a neutral spot. You gave up all your power. And I was like, Roger, I am a reporter. He is a presidential candidate. He does have the power. The nature of this relationship is I pursue him. I need access to him. He doesn't need me. it's appropriate in the context of this relationship for me as the reporter to say, may I have time with you? I will come to you, and I would like to bring you this objection I have and ask you to stop this behavior. I didn't think there was anything wrong with it. And I think he was actually just mad because he wanted credit internally for having organized it all himself, the come to Jesus and the reconciliation and the new page. But he was so pissed off. That's another thing that the movie Bombshell gets wrong. They show Roger really happy about that question, like, good job. No, he was very angry about that question. And I think we would find out, soon thereafter, why Roger was so very paranoid about that particular subject.
Mm-hmm. What was the conversation like with Trump when you went there?
Classic Trump. Funny. He hugged me. He'd been telling people to boycott the show for months. He said he watched it every night. He was so magnanimous, warm. It was like none of it ever happened.
Did it totally disarm you?
Not totally. I was like, what the fuck is going on here? But I was relieved that he was so nice. I didn't know what to expect. And he'd just been so, I don't know, just so rough. So I just wasn't sure what I was getting myself into there. But he could not have been nicer. He's like, Melania loves your show. Get her in here, Melania. Eric Trump came in. It was like, I can't believe this is what's happening.
Wow.
And then he asked for my phone number. And I was like, oh, God. Remember, he had just done the thing in that primary with Lindsey Graham where he posted Lindsey Graham's phone number publicly.
Oh,
because
yeah,
he turned on Lindsey.
That.
And I was like, you're not going to Lindsey Graham me here, are you? And he's like, no, I promise to keep it to myself. And it was really crazy. So crazy, Shawn, because I walked out. We agreed, like, we're good. And the last thing he said to me before I walked out of Trump Tower was, Megyn, it's not such a good thing if they're not talking about us. And I was like, oh my God, was this whole thing for show? Like, was he acting the whole time?
Wow.
To generate buzz? And I really don't know the answer to that other than what I told you, my suppositions about his feelings the night of, and then the motivations thereafter.
Wow. There was a scene in the movie where I believe it was your husband seemed disappointed. Maybe like you were not being true to yourself.
Too solicitous of him.
Is that?
That's a made-up scene. That never happened. Doug always had my back and was on my side. But I think they used Doug sort of as a stand-in for many millions of people who were angry I made up with Trump and angry that I then did a relatively friendly interview with him, turning the page, which is true. I mean, I did do that. I did have a goal in that interview. It certainly wasn't to stir things back up. People were right about that, but it was really just to see if Trump was an empathetic person. If you go back and look at that interview, you see almost every single question is toward that end. Asked him about his brother who had alcoholism, asked him about his dad, asked him about people who he's attacked on the internet, asked him a little bit about me. But people, what the left, what they wanted me to go in there and be like, you called me a bimbo. How dare you? That's not me. I was enjoying not being his target, and I certainly didn't want to spend more time miring in how I was your target for all this time. So yeah, people were very angry, and I think that's really when I lost a lot of the media, as like they just turned on me and never came back over, which is fine. Their love was artificial when it was given, and it was unimportant to me then, and it remains unimportant to me. But I did think it was a very telling dynamic how as soon as I no longer was Trump's foil, they were like,
wow. So it sounds like and looked like from the film and the reports and while it was happening that sexual harassment was just running rampant throughout the entire Fox News organization. Is that an accurate
I
assumption?
think it was pretty pretty common, yeah. Yeah, it was pretty frequent. I mean, this is back before Fox News was patient zero in the MeToo movement. Um, we were a year before Weinstein, so it wasn't really a thing for people to come forward, for women to come forward like that. So, yeah, it was prevalent. I would come to find out it was prevalent at NBC. And then, as the world would later find out, it was prevalent at CBS and it was existent at ABC and CNN and MSNBC. So, we were not special at Fox News. We were just first.
How did it start with you?
Um, I was very young. I was at the very beginning of my career there, still a reporter in DC, working for Brit Hume and Kim Hume, and very green, but loving my time. And Roger took an interest in me early on. I think, in fairness to myself, it wasn't all because he wanted to sleep with me. I think he understood he had somebody who was a lawyer, who, had potential in this business that was unique and that he really wanted to develop it because, above all, he was a capitalist. He wanted to make money. So he started to mentor me in a great way. He gave me so much good advice I still rely on and miss to this day. Um, and we kind of became friends. He would have me to his house with his wife and with Doug for dinner, and we went many times, and I got to know him. And then he would make body comments to me a lot, which didn't faze me. I had come off 10 years of practicing law. Like I said, we were pretty raunchy in the law, not quite this raunchy, but, salty language. And I'm almost impossible to offend. I'm really hard to offend. I'm freaking Irish. We don't offend easy. Um, so I don't know. I wasn't too fazed by the inappropriate comments about women's looks or this one slept her way to the top, that kind of thing. I remember getting worried when he said, I'll spare this news anchor the identification, but he said, this anchor who I admired at another network was smart. She slept with her boss, and that gave her every opportunity she ever wanted. That's how she got to the top. And I remember being like, now that's different from just body. That sounds like an invitation.
Mm-hmm.
And then there'd be more inappropriate comments about me. The initial comments were just about in general, like sexual. It's almost like how a groomer, frankly,
Mm-hmm.
operates. Then he gets specific about me. And he said something about how good he thought I would look in my bra and panties. I was like, all right, now we're really over on thin ice. This, in no world is this okay talk between a boss, the most powerful man in news, and a first-year reporter. I remember thinking this is so ballsy because he knows I'm a lawyer. He knows I just came off of 10 years of practicing law, including employment law. Like, this is definitely not kosher. But my feeling was he just wanted to have an affair with me. I thought the guy was Randy, I wasn't thinking he's this massive sexual harasser. It just wasn't even, that's not at all how I experienced it. I'm like, he wants to go to bed with me. And not to sound, self-congratulatory, but he wasn't the first man to behave like this around me. It wasn't like this is the first time a man's ever come on to me and want to have sex with me. So I was like, oh, this is tricky because he's my boss. I've got to get out of this. I'm definitely not going to have sex with him or an affair. This is very tricky. But my only goal was get out of it without hurting him because I want a career.
Mm-hmm.
My career, which I'm loving, is on the line here. If I upset him or play this wrong, he's going to feel rejected, which is the worst way you can make a man feel. And if that man's your boss, your career's out the window, especially when you were me with no connections, no history, no resume, no body of work, nothing. So it was just like dancing on the head of a pin to try to just get out of bounds whenever he said something like that. Out of bounds, out of bounds, out of bounds. And for most of this time, I was divorcing Dan and not yet with Doug. So I couldn't be like, oh, Doug, which is a very effective way of telegraphing to a man,
Mm-hmm.
no. But I didn't have that, and I didn't have a ton of experience in, like, just navigating this particular thing, so it was bad. But I did know that if he was going to fire me, I needed a record because I would have sued him. And so I started keeping a diary every night whenever I had an interaction with him, very detailed. I told my office mate, Major Garrett, who's the White House reporter for CBS News now, and he would later back me up when this investigation came down. We used to sit in my office. We shared an office together, and the phone would light up, and I'm a first year, and it would say, Roger Ailes. He'd be like, he never got a call from Roger in his career there. Called me all the time. I'm like, oh my God. He kept calling me up to New York, which was also unusual. I would later find out, these long face-to-face meetings were unusual. And I called my lawyer. I called Jones Day, and they opened up a case file and created a conflict just in case like he ever called them. So he couldn't hire them so they could represent me if I needed it. And then I told my supervisor, who I have chosen not to name, in the DC bureau, but I went to this person and I told them what was happening. And I didn't want this person, just to be clear, to run to human resources. I wasn't like, let's make a record. This is inappropriate. I was like, please help me. I want it to end and I don't want to get fired and I don't know what to do. And this person told me he's just an unhappily married man and he's a good man. And if you just stay down here in DC and ignore him, it'll stop. And that's exactly what happened. And I chalked it up to exactly what I was told. He's a good man, but an unhappily married man. And he was looking to have an affair and it wasn't going to be with me. And I kind of skipped the, crescendo of it all, but it came to a peak in his office one day when he grabbed me and tried to kiss me and I pushed him off of me. It wasn't like violent, it wasn't like, I'll have you. And I was like, no, it was just like, he tried to go for it. And I pushed him back and I could smell alcohol on his breath. And he came at me again. He clearly didn't get the message. Like most men, after one shove off would know it's a no. He came at me again. And same thing, I pushed him away and I went over by the door to get out. He used to lock the door when not just me, but women were in there. And he looked at me and said, when is your contract up? And it was soon. I remember telling him whenever it was up. And then he came for me a third time.
A third time?
Yeah. And I pretended to stumble off of my high heel, to get away from him. And I ran out the door. And I called my Jones Day lawyer in tears. I'm definitely getting fired. This is going to be a disaster. And that's when they opened up the case file and did all that stuff. But ultimately, I did what, my friend and supervisor told me to do. And he did. He didn't pursue it and he did not exact any sort of retribution on me. He got past it. He ignored me. I was a peon and I just nose to the grindstone for the next couple of years down there. A couple of years went by and he promoted me to anchor. The long meeting stopped and I got the anchor job. I mean, I was earning my bones that time. I was doing really solid reporting on big, big cases. So it wasn't like, oh, gee, nothing happened. And then he gave me, I worked and I was getting well known and there was buzz. I was coming up. And then he made me an anchor and he never bothered me again. Never. He was always the perfect gentleman with me after that. He had gotten the message. He still was bawdy here and there, but never like about me. He clearly, and then I was with Doug and he was always respectful of that.
When did you become aware of all the other women?
So I found out that my closest friend there, Janice Dean, she's the meteorologist, also had an experience with him. And we kind of laughed. We weren't thinking he was this massive harasser. We were like, oh, men, And it was right at the same time mine happened. So I filed that under, took a shot with her too. Didn't work out with me, took a shot with her, didn't work out with her. her story always, made me laugh because he took her out for like a job interview at a hotel, and not a hotel room, but like in a restaurant. And they had a glass of wine, and before she knew it, he was like reaching out to like hold her hands across the table, which is a weird move on a job interview. And he said to her, "I need to know how you see me." And Janice, who's just the best, was like a teacher, like a mentor. Anyway, we used to laugh about that story. It was like, these pervy old men. That was the file it was in.
So this is like similar to getting heckled at the nursing home.
Yeah, it's like harmless. Well, once I got past my thing, which was definitely not harmless, it had the potential to do a lot of harm. It was like, all right, it's done. I managed it. I don't want to make a federal case out of it at all. And neither did she. She wanted her job. He offered her a job. She rejected him. She had the same experience. She rejected him, and he hired her anyway, and then left her alone. So we both had it in the file of he took a shot. It didn't work out. That happens. It's not supposed to happen in the work exactly with the boss, but it does happen. And then Gretchen Carlson filed her lawsuit. And we were like, holy shit. I mean, that truly was a bombshell. And that all hell broke loose. I mean, just that lawsuit was a before and after moment. All hell broke loose.
How long was the lawsuit going on before you made your decision?
I don't remember. I don't remember the time span. I mean, the whole thing seemed to be maybe 6 weeks, but don't hold me to that.
Were you close with Gretchen Carlson?
Not at all. I didn't really like her.
Okay.
A few of us did. And in a war between Gretchen and Roger, we were all Team Roger. That's just the truth. She didn't really like me either. So the instinct was not in any way to help her. But truth is truth. Like, reality is reality. And while I offer no opinion on her situation and what did or did not happen between Gretchen and Roger, I knew from the second that thing was filed that if I got called in by any investigative body, he was fucked. Because by this point, I had risen to the top of Fox News. I had credibility. I had no axe to grind. She had just been fired. And I knew that they would believe me. And I deserved to be believed. I just saw that this thing had set wheels in motion that were ultimately going to end in calamity. And God, it was terrible. It was just terrible because I didn't want to hurt him and I didn't want to help her. And I didn't want to upend my career. And I didn't want to be known as the face of some sexual harassment movement or lawsuit, or to have the fact that I'd been harassed broadcast to anybody. I was humiliated about it. It wasn't something that was seen the way it is now. It was, usually they'd say you brought it on yourself. Back then. Only now are we starting to understand, actually, this is really kind of common and it doesn't mean you were asking for it. Trust me, I was not asking for it. I just didn't want anything to do with it. It was like cesspool of toxicity over there. My life's going pretty well over here. I don't want to go in your pool. But one thing after another started happening. And what happened was I found out that they were going to limit the investigation to only staff that worked for Gretchen. And I found that out after other women had spoken to either me or Janice. So like once the lawsuit was filed, women started talking. Me too, me too, me too. And so Janice and I started to hear this was widespread. This was not just the two of us. And her it had happened to like some young women, and these were deeply concerning things, and we were like, oh my God. And then other women, non-Fox women, came out and spoke, I think, to Gabe Sherman in a piece that was explosive about terrible allegations they were making about him before Fox News. So we were all like, oh my God. And now I'm reevaluating everything that happened to me, and Janice reevaluating everything that happened to her. And then we found out that Roger had managed to limit the investigation to just Gretchen's staff. And that was the real moment of reconciliation for me, because I knew that would end it. That would have ended it, and he would have been fine. They would not have talked to Janice. They would not have talked to me. They would not have talked to the other women we now knew about. And I knew women not only at Fox, but at CNN, like elsewhere, who had worked for him at this point. And it's just, I betrayed him. And that's how I see it.
You still feel like that?
Yeah. I mean, I know I had good reasons, and it's not like I would have done it differently. But I have really complicated feelings because I betrayed him. And now I also feel like I let down the women who came after me, who were harassed after I was. Even though I don't blame the women who were harassed by him before me, it's just my own thinking, like if I had done more in that first year as a reporter, if I had blown up my career and just said, fuck it, I'll go back to practicing law. I know actual women who it wouldn't have happened to. But at the same time, I didn't want to hurt him. He'd been so good to me. We'd become friends. He'd really helped me and my family. He'd always been good to me. But it was like, what if he's still doing it? Am I just going to like cash my check and go out there like with swagger on the air? Like, I'm fine. I'm good. It was just an impossible situation. It was so hard. And I wrote about this in my book, and it's a true story. The deciding moment was my daughter was little. She was like 4 or 5, 4. And she had fallen off the jungle gym a week earlier. I'd been on the road and cut the back of her head significantly and needed a bunch of stitches. And a week later, she went back at the top of that jungle gym in her dress. She had this white dress with red polka dots and sneakers. And I have a picture of her with this huge smile at the top of the same jungle gym. And I'm scrolling through my pictures one day, and there's that picture. And I'm like, look at her. It's so brave, right? Like, she fell far and really hurt herself, and she's right back up there. It's like an extraordinary act of courage for a little girl. And she has this like zigzag scar in the back of her head, like a Shazam kind of thing. And I call it her superhero scar, And I remember thinking, like, this can't happen to her, to another young woman again. Not here, not by him, not if my saying something can stop it. So I called Lachlan Murdoch and I said, you better get your lawyer on the phone, because I have something to tell you. And then I told them the story of what had happened to me all those years earlier. And then they hired a real law firm to do a real investigation. And dozens of women came in, including ones to that day.
That day.
That were going through it.
Wow. It's, I wasn't expecting that reaction.
It's complicated. People are complicated. That's what my therapist always says. People are complicated. And then, internally at Fox, it was terrible, which is another like heavy layer of it because everyone was very angry with me. Some had already been angry because of the Trump stuff. And then it was just such a betrayal that they thought I had committed. And they didn't know. People softened after they found out what really was the truth about him. But in the beginning, they just thought I sided with Gretchen and like had some nothing with him that I then complained about to try to hurt him. So they were very angry. They thought I stuck a knife in Daddy, for no reason. And he really was kind of like Daddy. He was like almost like a cult leader there. So that just, going to work in those days it was crazy. I just felt so heavy. And it was the Republican National Convention in 2016 where I had all these security guards because the death threats and Trump, and it was, it had gone up. And I was getting ready to go on the set for primetime coverage with all my colleagues. And I saw on the TV screen a report by Howie Kurtz, the media guy, about me. It had leaked that I was cooperating with the investigators. And the whole report was about how I was a liar. They had pulled every nice thing I had ever said about Ailes in the press over the previous 10 years. And were saying, basically she's got to be lying because look how she actually feels about Roger. And just painted me as this awful, disgusting turncoat. They never called me for comment on the report, try to find out whether it was true. Meanwhile, the Murdochs knew it was true. The Murdochs were talking to me. This is their network.
Wow.
But Roger was calling the shots. And so Roger told Howie Kurtz to do that, and he did it. And I'm in the hotel room looking at this television like, is this happening? And I, speaking of the angels who come to get us, got a text or a call right after this happened from my priest who happened to be at the RNC and saw the report and said, "Do you need me?" And I said, "Yes." And he came over. I've never done this before in my life. I'm not one of those people who has a priest who I call and then we pray together. But my priest came over and we prayed together. And I went out on the air that night and it was it was just stone cold. It was rough. And then he was fired the next day.
You do see all the good that came from that, correct?
Yes. To be honest, I have mixed feelings about it because I know that many women were saved from active harassment or, harassment as a result of that whole thing. I played a part in it, but truly the women who did it were the younger women who it was happening to then, who had everything to lose. They didn't have money in the bank like I did. They didn't have a relationship with him. They couldn't just leave and go get another job at another network. They owed him everything. And they fucking did it. They went into that lawyer room and they told the stories, not knowing that he would be fired, 100% believing that they would be fired. That's guts. When I think about the MeToo movement, those are the women, I picture their faces. Those are the women who did it. That was the goodness of the MeToo movement. But the movement was so disgusting by its end, so corrupted and unjust and devoid of due process and such a witch hunt that I don't like being associated with it.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly don't want to be the face of it. I'm not proud of the movement. It was politicized and bastardized and used to take down political figures and others with whom some women just had political or business beefs. But then my therapist always says, cognitive behavioral therapy, you have to make a list on the other side. And the list on the other side is, Les Moonves got thrown out of CBS. That was a good one to go. Harvey Weinstein got thrown out of Hollywood. That was a great one. Matt Lauer lost a job. That needed to happen. So there are all sorts of examples I could look at that were not politicized that I know a lot about, especially the ones in the news industry, more than what came out publicly. And I know that those were good.
I mean, I think you just never know how big the impact that you make is. And it just goes so far beyond that. And I mean, do you think that's still going on at Fox today?
I don't know. I mean, there's a real dynamic that men and women are attracted to each other and often find a spouse or a future spouse at the workplace. And it's always been. So, you can't scare humans out of behaving humanly. Like that's normal for them to be attracted to each other and they spend a lot of hours at the office. And sometimes those office romances bloom into beautiful things. Where there's a power imbalance, it's very tough and risky. And I think at least now people are more aware of that. And maybe more bosses are aware that she might be telegraphing to you that she's okay with this, but she might just be scared. Got to tread so lightly there. I think there has been greater awareness brought to the question. And look, I definitely am stopped by a lot of women who say thank you, who sort of saw a model for how to get through this kind of thing and then followed it. And whenever they say that, I do think of these young women who I know who went in there because they're still nameless as they wish to be. And I see them thriving now at Fox and I root them on and I'm thrilled that their careers are going so well. But I know who they are. Like in my mind, those are like the true heroines because they were so powerless. But they told their stories and they survived. They still have their career there. I do think in many ways it was the end of my career at Fox. There was really no staying
Yeah.
after that.
Yeah. Well, I'm proud of you.
Thank you.
And I mean, I don't think you'll ever know the amount of women that didn't have to go through that because it seemed to me like you were the tipping point. And I'll bet that saved a lot of trauma, not just at Fox, but everywhere, So
I hope so. I don't know. It's like, I'm not sure how to file it away. If I don't file it under the MeToo movement, I do better with it. Like we had our own thing. And then the Harvey Weinstein thing kicked off this other thing. But I certainly don't want to be associated with anything that, what they did to Brett Kavanaugh, like all these, any political figure now gets accused. Like that's all just such BS.
yeah.
And I have 2 sons and I have a husband. And I hate that now it's like all you need is an accusation. I think we've righted that ship a bit. We've restored some balance, but not totally. I want nothing to do with women who want that and who do that and make a Sunday morning regret into a Me Too harassment case that ruins a young man's life. I completely disassociate myself with that. And I've had a long career of reporting on those women and exposing them. Long career. I was one of the only ones who knew that Duke rape accuser was a liar. I still get thanked by guys who knew those 3 guys and by those 3 guys themselves, for that matter. So I'm not on board with any of that. I'm all about due process. So I guess in that way, I'm sort of a chameleon.
Did you and Gretchen ever develop any type of a friendship or discuss what had happened?
No, I've never spoken to her.
Still to this day.
She never said anything to me. She certainly didn't say thank you, which is fine. I did not do anything to help her. And for a long time, she didn't thank the women who came forward. She made every interview about herself, as she does to this day. That's all I'm going to say.